What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Nightblade healer. So I mentioned this in all of my other build videos up to this point, and fact still remains the same. Not much has changed between Dragonhold and Harrowstorm. The patch was not really advertised as a big rebalance patch. It was definitely more focused in on story and the two dungeons. And while there are new sets that were introduced, none of them really made the cut to kind of be included in the healer toolkit. So the builds that you see for Harrowstorm are going to be very similar to what you have seen in Dragonhold. Nightblade healers pretty much remain where they have been. They are perfectly capable of clearing all content, but they definitely suffer from some weaknesses that you don't really have in Templar and Warden healers, so they're not quite as popular or as common as endgame healers as those two classes are. But nonetheless, they are still potent healers, and there have been a few buffs over the past few patches that have made them a little bit stronger. But again, they still sort of pale in comparison in terms of popularity and effectiveness compared to Templars and Wardens. So like the rest of our build video, we won't be going over any sort of gear. That is reserved for the gear video, which is popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. So if you're interested in knowing what sort of gear you can run on a healer, which gear you should run on a healer, feel free to check out that video and then come back here. This video will be discussing all the skills that you're going to want to have, as well as sort of a surface view of how you want to play a healer generally, and what sort of sets Nightblade healers apart from your more traditional and more sort of meta Templar and Warden healers. So let's go ahead and get started here with our skills. So starting off with our front bar, this is the Restoration Staff bar. We have Illustrious Healing. This is because we are using the Massive Restoration Staff, so we obviously want to use this skill in order to proc its special effect, but it's also a really nice long duration heal over time ability, so pretty nice hot have on hand. A lot of healing nowadays is sort of like layering your heal over times and then just kind of dealing damage, maintaining buffs otherwise. Then we have Comet Prayer for the Minor Berserk. It also serves as a burst heal. Nightblades don't really have a strong burst class heal, so having Comet Prayer here as an AoE burst heal is pretty nice. It's not as strong as other burst heals like Breath of Life or Ritual Rebirth that Wardens or Templars and Wardens have, but it's still pretty it's still sufficient for most scenarios, but mainly you're using this here for the Minor Berserk buff. Next we have the class heal. So this is your burst heal, which is not quite as strong compared to, like I mentioned, Breath of Life and Mushrooms. It's still fairly strong though. It's about 10k health before buffs, so still pretty good, but the downside is it does end up costing you health. Now we do have the Healthy Offering morph. There is another morph of this ability known as Shrewd Offering, which reduces the cost of the health, but you should be healing yourself anyways because you are the healer, so you should be catching yourself in your own heals, so the reduced cost is not really a great option here. Whereas Healthy Offering, while you do have that damage over time on you, you get Minor Mending, which reduces your healing done by 8%, which is definitely more beneficial than reducing the cost, the health cost of the initial morph here. So let's definitely go with Healthy Offering. So just do be mindful that the dot can stack. So if you need to, let's say, use Healthy Offering 3 or 4 times, you have 3 to 4 of those dots ticking at a time. So just be mindful of that. Again, you should be catching yourself in your own heals, so that shouldn't be that big of an issue, but it's still possible to kill yourself using Healthy Offering. So just be quite mindful of your health before you end up using this burst heal. Next we have Debilitate. This is a source of minor magicka steal. It also counts as a single target dot for Zen. So for this particular setup I am wearing Zen, although my bars are not necessarily set up for Zen, but having Debilitate here, 1 gives you minor magicka steal, so you might not necessarily need to run Ellie Drain, but 2 again counts as a dot towards Zen. Next we have Energy Orb, which is the strongest, or I should say one of the strongest heals in the game right now. So really powerful, but you're mainly using this here for the combustion synergy, which return resources back to your DPS. For those of you guys who are coming back after a couple of patches, they have changed how orbs work, so you can no longer spam orbs. You can only have 1 orb out at a time, but multiple people can activate the synergy, so it doesn't disappear once the synergy is used. So just be mindful of that if you're a player that is returning from a hiatus. The way that orbs work has changed. Then for ultimate, you have a few options here, but I have Bolstering Darkness here for the mage protection. It also gives a synergy when you use it, which gives you a nice heal over time to anybody who activates it. But you do have a couple of options here when it comes to ultimates, which we'll cover in a few minutes. Next for our back bar, we have Elemental Drain, so this gives you the Major Breach and Minor Magicka Steal. So Debilitate also gives you the Minor Magicka Steal, but it also counts as a dot towards Zen, so it might be more beneficial to run Debilitate and then just not run Ele Drain. So Ele Drain is sort of, I don't want to call it optional for a Nightblade healer, but it's more optional for a Nightblade healer, if that makes any sense at all. Next, we have Refreshing Path. This is another heal over time, which is about as strong as Healing Springs when it comes to the amount of healing that is done. Lasts for the exact same amount of time too, but it's not a radius. It is basically more or less like a sort of a cone. It's a little bit more of a rectangle, so just be mindful of where you're positioning Refreshing Path. It only hit allies in front of you, not behind you, so just be aware of which direction you're facing before you lay down Refreshing Path. Next, we have Blockade of Storms. This is to help proc the enchant that you have on your back bar, and also proc off balance. So 2 birds, 1 stone with that ability. Next, we have Siphoning Attacks. This is an optional ability. You shouldn't necessarily need Siphoning Attacks to maintain your Magicka, but if you do, this is definitely an option. Most healers will not need to run Siphoning Attacks. For those high drain scenarios, maybe certain fights in Halls of Fabrication, or maybe if you're the Tomb Healer in Lakessi's hard mode, you might want to run Siphoning for the additional Magicka sustain, but most healers will find that they don't really need it at all, so you can swap this out with another ability. Then we have Overflowing Altar for the Minor Lifesteal, as well as the Blood Feast synergy. So this is a pretty nice ability to have on hand. Minor Lifesteal does proc anything that has a heal, so things like Symphony of Blades will proc off of Minor Lifesteal, so it's a very easy way to help get those sets to proc. Then we have Aggressive Warhorn for the Major Force. Now, in terms of other abilities that you might want to consider running, depending on your group and what your raid lead might need, you have Lotus Fan, which acts as an AoE minor vulnerability. Usually, the Nightblade tank will be running this if you have a Nightblade tank in group, but sometimes you won't. So this is just an ability that you might want to have on hand here. Definitely get the Lotus Fan, not the Ambush setup, even though both provide minor vulnerability. Lotus Fan does it in an AoE. That's obviously a lot more beneficial in trash fights. So if you're the only Nightblade in the group, then you might need to run Lotus Fan in trash pools in order to get everybody hit with the minor vulnerability. If you need some more mitigation, you can also run Mirage, which gives you Major Evasion and Minor Resolve, both very strong mitigation sources. Major Evasion, while it only protects you from AoE attacks, a lot of damage that you face in Trials and Dungeons is considered AoE, so it is actually mitigated by Major Evasion, so pretty nice to have on hand. Then we also have Reaper's Mark, which applies Major Fracture and Major Breach, which might be useful in certain scenarios. So just keep that in mind, keep this ability in your back pocket in case you need it. It's probably going to be very rare that you're going to need to use this ability, but it's always nice to have this option for whatever weird strategy that your raid lead might come up with. Under the Shadow line, not much here to really pick up, besides for Bolstering Darkness, obviously. Then we have under the Siphoning line, you do want to consider picking up Soul Siphon as an ultimate. This is a heal, gives you a small burst heal and then a nice heal over time associated with it. It also provides another synergy which deals damage and is a burst heal as well. It costs less than Bolstering Darkness and is an outright heal that doesn't require the synergy to activate. So for high heal scenarios, Soul Siphon is definitely a strong ultimate to consider running. I also want to mention here, Sap Essence is really nice for trash fights, for kind of an AoE heal as top of DPS. So you deal damage to all nearby enemies within 8 meters, and it also heals you and your allies for pretty good amount here, 1600 plus 20% more for each enemy hit. So if you hit 5 enemies, you heal for 3200. This is before all of your buffs, obviously. So once you have all your buffs active, this is obviously going to heal for quite a bit more. This is pretty nice in trash fights where you have multiple things to hit, but obviously for single target fights and boss fights, a 1600 times 1.2, it's not actually the very strong heal, so you're not obviously going to use this for boss fights. But for trash fights, pretty strong. It helps out with damage and heals, so kind of 2 birds in 1 stone with one ability here. Under the weapons line, might consider picking up Crushing Shock as a ranged interrupt. That's always helpful to have on hand. If you are running Zens, you might want to pick up Destructive Reach, which counts towards Zens. So this would be on your back bar, obviously, because it's a Destruction Staff ability. Under the Restoration Staff line, pretty much all these abilities do have their uses, but these three are probably going to be the ones you're going to be using most often. Radiating Regeneration just gives a nice heal over time to up to 3 allies within 28 meters of you, so pretty nice to have on hand. Then we have, I prefer the Healing Ward morph, but you can also use the Ward Ally morph. If you're running the Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff, you will need to pick up this ability here. Again, I prefer the Healing Ward morph, but you can also run the Ward Ally morph. This does sort of count as a burst heal, sort of, not really. So if you do need another burst heal, Healing Ward is an option. The shield is actually not that bad, and you can see here 5829 damage shield, so pretty good, and it can be increased by up to twice the size, so up to 10k damage shield, depending on severity of, how bad somebody's hurt. So this is potentially a pretty good ability to run. Very useful with, obviously, mandatory with the Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff, but even without it, it's still a potentially good ability to run. Next we have for Siphon, and I personally recommend Siphon Spirit over Quick Siphon, although Quick Siphon does have its uses. Siphon Spirit gives you minor life steal and minor magicka steal. So pretty nice 2-for-1 when it comes to this ability here. It's instant cast, doesn't have the cast time associated with it anymore, so definitely a potentially good option to run here. If you ever need a shield, just run either Morph of Annulment, Harness Magic, or Death Magic. Pick whichever one you'd like. If you're running Zens, make sure to have Soul Trap. This counts towards Zen. Also, under the Mage's skill line, Entropy, either Morph counts as for Zen, and Scalding Rune also counts for Zen as well. So you might want to have those two abilities active in case you are the Zen healer. Nothing much on the Citric Order line, except for maybe Mend Wounds. This can potentially give you the most amount of healing done per second, but it's a little bit funky to use, so I personally don't really recommend running this. There are very few healing checks in the game where you need the healing done per second that Mend Wounds can provide, and even then you can meet those healing checks without using this ability, so I personally kind of shy away from this. Under the Undaunted line, make sure to have everything unlocked. We already talked about Overflowing Altar and Energy Orb, but let's talk about the other three. So Shadow Silk you will use for the Black Widow synergy. While that synergy has been nerfed a few times now, it's still essentially free damage, so you might as well run it if you have the space for it. Now there are some strategies where you will need to taunt certain things, so make sure to pick up Inner Rage here. You can go with Inner Beast, that uses stamina though, so Inner Rage is typically going to be the better option here for healers. You have Bone Surge, which you're not really using for the shield, you're using this more for the Major Vitality bonus from the Spinal Surge synergy. This is going to be useful in those high healing scenarios. The most classic example being Baneful Mark and Execute in Cloud Rest. So those high healing scenarios is when you're going to want to run Bone Surge. Under the Alliance War line, make sure to have Efficient Purge for the Purge effect, obviously. Then you also have Reviving Barrier, which is a pretty hefty shield here. Plus it also has a nice heal over time while the shield is active. So pretty strong. Plus you also get 10% additional magicka regen while you have it slotted. So it's always nice to have that active there. But that pretty much covers all of the different skills. Now let's go ahead and talk about healing. So I personally do not play a Nightblade healer. So I do recommend checking out the links in the description below that I have various content creators who do heal. They will be able to give you kind of more information on how Nightblade healers will work and basically how the gameplay differs from your more traditional Templar and Warden healer. But healing in general, yes, your job is to heal things, but you also have a second job, which is to buff your allies and also debuff your enemies as well. So the good thing is a lot of the abilities that heal your allies also have a buffing effect as well. So for example, if you're running the Master's Restoration Staff and you use Illustrious Healing, not only are you healing them, you're also giving resources back, which helps boost sustain, which helps boost overall DPS. Combat Prayer is a burst heal, but it also provides Minor Berserk, which increases damage done by 8%. So you kind of cover both bases there. You're both healing and you're also buffing your allies that way. So a lot of beginner healers I've seen are all focused in on how much you can heal. That's not very important as a healer. It is part of your job, but more importantly is sort of maintaining your buffs and debuffs. And healing in ESO is actually fairly easy to do because you have a lot of heal over time, and damage and health for DPS is generally speaking fairly low. compared to some other games, at least relatively speaking. So it's actually very easy to heal in this game. I should say overheal in this game. So just putting down an orb and springs or Illustrious healing is normally enough to cover most incoming damage, except for very large hits. In those instances, you do have things like you might have Blood Altar out for the Blood Feast synergy, or you might just need to run Healthy Offering a few times in order to hit everybody who isn't able to get healed up right away from all your heal over times that you have active. Or you can just have all your heal over times active and you just pop down a Combat Prayer. So a lot of it is going to be centered around making sure you have your buffs and debuffs active. So you want to make sure to have Combat Prayer going at all times, to make sure you have that Minor Berserk going and active at all times. That's what separates out a okay healer from an awesome healer. The fact that they're able to maintain very good Combat Prayer uptime. Make sure have Blockade out at all times. That way you always have your enchants proccing and you'll always be able to prop off balance on cooldown, and all those sorts of things. So that's kind of the basis behind healing. Again, check out the content creators below. They'll be able to provide more information and have more streams on healing than I do. Now, in terms of Nightblade healing compared to Templar and Warden healings, I pretty much covered the big thing, which is your burst heal does have a big weakness in the fact that it does hurt you. It's not a big deal because you're a healer and you should be catching yourself in your healing springs or energy orbs, so it's not that big of a deal, but it is something to keep in mind. Your burst heal, while it is strong, is not quite as strong as, again, mushrooms or Templar's Breath of Life. So just keep that in mind as well. Where Nightblade healers kind of really shine is the fact that they have heal over times. So you have Refreshing Path, which is pretty strong heal over time, which also provides major expedition. But beyond that, they don't really provide too much to the group. They don't have any sort of unique synergies like Templars do with Purify or Wardens do with Budding Seeds. So they don't really provide that much group utility. Yes, there is the fact that you do have Lotus Fan, which provides minor vulnerability, but that's something a Warden healer can also provide with Fetcher Infection. And Nightblade tanks are much more popular now than they have been in the past, and they can also use Lotus Fan as well. So Nightblade healers, they don't really provide anything that a Nightblade in another position can provide, or another class potentially can provide. So that's why Nightblade healers aren't quite as popular or as commonly seen in endgame content. But like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, you're still capable of clearing all the content in the game. It's just going to probably be a little bit more difficult for you to find a group that'll be willing to take you in as a Nightblade healer. But with enough dedication, and if you're able to provide evidence that you're a very good healer, there's no reason why any group would deny a Nightblade healer. But that concludes this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Again, for more information about healing, for more complete details about healing, I highly recommend checking out the content creators below. I have links to their Twitch and YouTube channels. While I do heal on occasion, it's not my primary role. I don't really heal very often, so it's definitely not something I'm very familiar with. So I definitely recommend checking those guys out, those guys and girls out, in order to get more complete information about healing. Nonetheless, though, if you do have questions, feel free to ask them here. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.